Fury here, back again today with our CSL Videocast. As always, talking about the crazy antics of the league itself, and more importantly, the off season now, which we are fully in and making our way through. Gone through the draft. We're now obviously through the majority of free agency. And to join me today to try and break down some of the crazy free agency moves and having quite a good off season himself, the LA Lakers general manager Jester, aka Tim. How is everything going?
It's going okay. Off-season moves have been weird, but they're geared toward 19. So we'll see how they go. And you made some smart free agency decisions. Haha! I love being able to make that pun. Oh, and by the way, shout out to StreamYard. For those of you who aren't aware, Google made the very curious decision to get rid of Google Hangouts and Hangouts on Air. So Chris was like, well, what do we do now? So I did some Googling and I came across StreamYard, which is a really good replication of what Hangouts did. And it even adds a private chat function, which is pretty cool. So,
yeah, hence why we've had a long delay, I guess, between us talking about the top 10 of the draft and sort of a bit of hiatus in between because of the wonderful world that is Google and obviously YouTube deciding that Hangouts Air was no longer fit for purpose and deciding to drop that from the YouTube application. StreamYard, fantastic. You've kind of saved us here with our CSL Videocast, and I certainly can recommend it. It seems to be functioning pretty well, and hopefully you'll see this through this video, really, the first one we've done. But we're here to talk about today a little bit about the off-season and a bit about free agency, and to try and break down what has been probably the craziest off-season I have seen in a sim league, due to a couple of reasons, really. I guess the first one, Tim, is obviously the change in free agency approach, not using draft day sports directly for free agency because the league felt last year that it had some flaws, and to try and address that, we've obviously gone to a bit more of a human interaction, a bit more manual based, combined with an algorithm that the admins had designed. And boy, has it been an interesting off season for some really good reasons and for some other reasons which I think the league has acknowledged and will develop going forward. But I guess before we talk about the players, Tim, I guess your view on the free agency so far. I mean, for me, I found it really exciting, and it feels to me more like an actual NBA off season where players are moving, the money is being thrown around, the teams are interested, and you can see it all live going on 24 hours a day with this league. But interested to hear what you think. How do you think it's gone?
yeah, I will admit when the free agency system was initially proposed, I was a little hesitant. I'm like, I'm not quite sure how this is going to work. And then when I saw that, teams could bid on other players, multiple players without being restricted to cap space, I thought this is going to end in disaster. As it turns out, I was partially right, partially wrong. The system itself is absolutely the very core foundation of it is absolutely amazing. Um, the public offers are brilliant, and I love that they're real time. They really keep the activity going throughout the day, as opposed to, I know some people have talked about, for example, just running it once a day and just having the offers once a day. But, then it kind of defaults to, what we have during the regular seasons with the Sims, during what we had with DDS free agency, where everything's really quiet and there's not much going on until the sim is run. Then there's some commentary, some discussion. Whereas with this, because it's real time and because you're seeing things be put in and it be hidden before an admin or a PA gets a chance to process it, you have activity going all day, and you have people speculating, talking in chat, etc. about I wonder who's got the offer on this player, or wow, who gave Derek Favors $17 million, then reduced to 14.5 million, which I noticed. Um, but yeah, as far as an activity generator, it is probably the single best one that I've seen in any sim league ever. And yeah, there's places where tweaks can be made, adjustments can be made, but I personally would keep the public offers. I would keep the real time 2-3 times a day updating, both for the revealing who the offers are, what teams are offering, what the money is. And then, I really like that there's 3 PAs who have checked in, usually about twice a day, sometimes 3, with updates. And that's turned free agency into something that's been really exciting, which, I don't recall seeing this level of excitement around free agency ever in the sim league. And I realize part of it is that, there's the quality free agent crop. I mean, this might be one of the best free agent class we've ever had as far as unrestricted free agents. So I'm sure that's contributing to it. But I also think it's the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it just is another great advert for this league, I guess, in the sense that we know already that for a couple of years now we've had a fantastic draft team, and the output from the draft building up to it through the season, the scouting, the articles that come out, it feels like you get a personality with the player you pick, whether it be the number 1 pick or the number 56 pick. That you get a sense of what the players already like, and what it feels like you actually really are taking on this player and trying to fit him into your culture of your franchise. And now we've got this fantastic free agency system where you said, obviously it's live and you see the bids come through and it's the activity, but it feels like it's a real living and breathing free agency now. Whereas I've never had that feel in a sim league before. So I know, like,
Right.
obviously people have created Twitter accounts off the back of this free agency because it just ties so nicely to that, because you can sort of update like what's going on, who you're bidding for before other people see it. And you could I mean, I found myself, I don't know about you, Tim, but I found myself a couple of times a day just quickly scanning down the free agency bid list just to see who's getting offers, who's outbidding who, what we can't quite see what that team is yet because the manual bit behind hasn't been uploaded, but I can see, someone's put down a maximum offer for James Harden. Four teams have done that now. Oh my goodness, there's real competition for that player. To talking about, for example, someone like Jordan McRae, where as the teams have sort of started to bid around that. Is that one team? Is that just Oklahoma? Is that you kind of get that real sense of something that's actually living and breathing, and it's made the offseason so much more interesting. It really has.
Yeah, and you could just imagine, you know, like in real life, sports writers publishing articles of, oh, there's a rumor that the Nuggets have offered 15 million to John Wall, but the Clippers are offering 16 million, and will he take the extra money, or does he prefer to stay in Denver where he's played before and he's got that winning culture, as opposed to the Clippers, who are on their way back up, but they haven't proven it in the season record yet. And so yeah, you really do have that sort of living,
Yeah,
breathing
yeah.
dynamic. And
It,
one thing I do want to mention briefly about the draft team, I think it was a very smart idea that they put in where um, GM's got one free scout of a player, and we're able to write an article based off of that scout. I think that helped reduce the load for the draft team, because that was then 20 some players they didn't have to write about, and it also allowed more players to be covered and generated more discussions. So I definitely think that's something they should keep going forward.
yeah, yeah. I mean, not to go off on a tangent. The only thing I'd say on that is it was a great idea, but if there's a way they can try and stagger that through the season, so you know each division GM for this month gets the free scout, then the next division, and so on, to sort of try and stagger it. Because I found that there's just a bombardment of just a huge amount of articles at the beginning of the season. So if they could stagger that, that'd be great, because it just keeps the activity going. But just coming back to free agency itself, the other thing that you obviously mentioned about the bids and, you know, teams getting offers and you feel it's live. But I also got the sense of, in my head, of almost, you know, where, you know, the top players go and they have meetings with the various teams they're interested in. I felt towards the end of the free agency, I felt the player agents did a really good job of just describing the teams in the competition who weren't. So it felt like as if, oh, I don't know, Elfrid Payton has gone and had a conversation with the Clippers, but he's not interested. But, you know, he's really interested in Cleveland and Miami. They're the two that are sort of in the front for it, you know, because of his personality. And it felt like, you know, they added that sort of characteristic towards the end, and that was one of the things they didn't get right at the beginning, I felt. But adding that going forward is going to be a fantastic feature as well.
Yep. Yeah. Because that was, I noticed that was one thing I mentioned. I said, you know, the PA's initial feedback, it felt like, okay, this is just something that, you know, an AI chatbot could just spit out. But I noticed they, to their credit, they took that criticism on right away, and they made adjustments right away. Like you said, within the, you know, this calendar system, free agency system, which I thought was fantastic. And it really helped elevate the free agency another level.
Yeah, completely agree. To sort of get away from just talking about free agency pros and cons, should we dive in and talk about a few players now and some of the actual decisions and movements that have made? So I guess, should we start with the obvious one? Probably. I guess there's two obvious ones, you know, everyone will want us to talk about. And the first one I've got on my list here, going up from the screen, is Paul George. You know, Dallas not having a GM and Brett kindly stepping in, he kind of decided to kind of make probably the right decision for the Dallas Mavericks and sort of go, okay, we are in rebuild mode now. Whatever GM is going to come and pick this up, he's not going to want a team that's got an aging set of stars. They're not going to perform. You know, Paul George is probably the one that we can cut ties with now. We've still got Derrick Rose. We've still got Fareed and others, and we'll go with that core for now. So it kind of led Paul George to be probably the most available free agent at the beginning of this off season, really, because of that decision. And boy, there was a lot of competition for him.
Yeah, and I think Brett was smart to go ahead and renounce Paul George, because that opened up the cap space to be free agent players, and he also he in Miami really started, and you guys as well, took advantage of the opportunity that this free agency system allows, that DDS didn't take into account very well, and that's the sort of big 1-year offer to older guys, where, you know, it makes sense that they would take, like Ricky Rubio would take like 16 million for 1 year, whereas in DDS he might sign for you know, 3 years at you know, 6 million a year.
It's
you know,
the real life JJ Redick, isn't it? Taking the $22 million 1-year offer from the 76ers, because it's a great fit for him. He's exactly what they need. They need to just fill some cap up, and it's a win-win. He gets paid, he'll get some minutes, he'll add some value to that roster, and then he'll come back next year. If he gets, you know, $1 million, he's still made more than he probably would have done with a mid-level exception for 4 years. So fantastic idea by Brett and Dallas. But coming back to Paul George, really, and the competition, so that obviously led basically Paul George to sort of sit there with his player agent and go, guys, I haven't got a team. I'm one of the best players in the league. Can still do it. I might be a little bit older now, but, you know, I can elevate a team, and he still can elevate a team from being a, you know, a mid-tier team to being a playoff team. And that's a huge draw for a lot of teams crying out for that sort of, you know, leverage up the league. So, you know, I mean, the teams that are in competition for him were some obvious ones, really, I guess. The Washington Wizards, the LA Clippers, the New Orleans Pelicans. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think also Houston may have put an offer in for him as well early on.
Yeah, I think they did.
So there were some really good situations for him. We can break down each of them. In the end, it kind of came down, I think, to possibly three teams: the Clippers, the Wizards, and the Pelicans. Tough decision to make for any player agent, I guess. You can look at the Wizards, a team that has been in the playoffs quite regularly recently. Got some good talent, building a good core. You've got the Clippers, who have fallen away through just unlucky through the previous free agency process, building up slowly, but huge amounts of cap basically going through the next few seasons. Young core, Paul George could add that sort of talent presence, that veteran talent presence they probably need. And then you got the New Orleans Pelicans, a team that have just been atrocious since I've been in the league, really. Obviously won a title with Anthony Davis a few years ago, had some unluckiness with his injuries, but they already have a star they can pair with Paul George. And I guess let's ask you, Tim, if you were the player agent and you had those three teams, would you still make the same decision and for Paul George and take him to the New Orleans Pelicans for that 4-year deal that's slightly below max?
I don't know. Personally, I probably would have taken the Washington deal, just because that would get Paul George closer to another championship, because he has one with the Indiana Pacers.
Yeah.
So personally, I would have taken Washington, but do you remember what Washington offered?
I think it was I think it was 3 years, but I think it was only 2 guaranteed. So the third year I think was a team option. If I may be wrong with that, but I'm sure the reason the player agent gave, I think in the end, was something very similar along those lines. Let me just check whilst we're looking at this, if I can find the player agent comment, which of course I probably can't.
Yeah.
Let me have a look. I think it might be on the first page originally. Was it with the? So originally, I think this was the one that kind of caused the GMs to cry out for. We need more information about decisions, because I think they just gave a flat, here's the contract. Let me see if I can dig out, because I think Miles came in and sort of said, "Oh, hang on, guys, this is kind of why the player agent and the algorithm kind of made this decision."
Yeah, that might have been on the third page.
Yeah, here we go. It might be this one.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. So the Washington Wizards, it was a 2-year guaranteed deal. So if you were comparing a 2-year guaranteed deal versus a 4-year, I guess that was the reason, because I think Paul George's greed was as high as his play for winner, possibly. So that was kind of the reasoning for it. And I remember reading this and thinking, that was a really tough decision to make, but I can completely understand why the player agent went with the money as well. Because you look at Paul George's agent, when he gets to, I think he'll be 37 by the end of this deal, he's not going to command the same sort of salary that he would be on. So it kind of makes sense for him to sort of, this is his last paycheck, and cash, even though it's stretched out over 4 years, is still better than a shorter term deal going back on the market at 35, 36 to possibly not get anywhere near that kind of value. So makes sense, I guess. In terms of the New Orleans Pelicans, it's a short-term gain, isn't it, really, for them? A short-term massive gain for them. AD and Paul George, I mean, that's a fantastic duo to start any team off with.
Yeah, and they made the absolutely brilliant trade to pick up Mo Harkless, who is like the perfect complement to Paul George and Anthony Davis. He can just, he's not going to eat a lot of shots. He can just sit out there on the 3-point line, hit those corner threes and above the break threes. and and be the defensive stopper they need. So, they've got a great set of three players there. It's just there's like nothing else around them at all. So it will be interesting to see how it works out. Um, I do think if they both stay healthy, that's the key point. If Paul
Yeah,
George and
yeah,
Anthony Davis can both stay healthy, I think we're probably looking at them probably about I'm going to say a 6 or 7 seed. It feels like about with a potential to possibly go as high as the 5, um, but 6 or 7 seems about right for me.
yeah. I mean, Mo Harkless. I think the only thing that detracts Mo Harkless from actually being on he's on a team that's vying for the playoffs now, but previous to that was just his contract. I know I tried so many times to try and make that work. Just it didn't fit for my team and the contracts I had. And I know I spoke to probably 4 or 5 other general managers, all teams in the sort of playoff hunt over the past season and a half, all tried to have a look at him, but just that sizable contract just couldn't make it work. And fantastic
Right.
idea for the Pelicans to pick him up. Really great player. I'm sure he'll prove his worth over there. And as you said, I kind of agree that they're probably looking at that sort of 6 to 8 playoff seed now, minus any other moves they possibly might make. But yeah, fantastic pickup for them, and interesting decision to start with one of the big names of this free agency. Really, should we move on to the other big name that caused a lot of debate, which was none other than James Harden, formerly of the Golden State Warriors, a team that, if I remember rightly, sort of went really big a couple of seasons ago with a previous general manager picking up Durant and Harden and kind of hoping that those two would carry them to playoff and championship glory, and kind of didn't pan out like that. They had injuries and kind of didn't build the right core around those two, which kind of meant that whilst Golden State were going to compete, obviously, to retain James Harden, there was an opportunity, a window there for a playoff consistent, possibly borderline championship team to come in with a maximum offer and pick up James Harden. And, we saw that with the Houston Rockets.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that was the right decision by the PA, because remember he does have a long history with Houston. He won a championship with Houston. He was really the first player to really ignite the sort of small ball period that we've seen in the league, where he was playing power forward, he was playing point guard, he was shifting all around. So it was a situation where he got to go back to the team he won a championship with, with a GM who knows how to use him creatively. It almost, in a way, kind of feels like when LeBron went back to Cleveland, only, he's already won a championship, but it still had that same kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, I agree. That's immediately what came into my head when I saw this, and I thought, oh, he's going back home. Essentially, he's going back to the team that he won a championship with, and it essentially was so successful that the league had to change rules around player positions in DDS. So probably the right decision in the end. Perfect situation for him. I mean, my goodness, that team now just scares the living daylights out of me. I guess you've got Kemba Walker, Malik Monk, James Harden, and Karl Anthony Towns as 4 of your starting 5. I mean, those 4 guys are probably Hall of Fame players in the CSL when it's all said and done, I think. So it's going to be incredible to see how KW, Kyrus, the GM at Houston meshes this talent together to get it all to fit. It's going to be interesting to watch, and the rest of the league are just playing catch up, really, as I said in an article I put together at the weekend. I mean, fantastic, great opportunity again. I think just to add, Tim, to what you said earlier around the big contracts for 1 year. This is a great example of the new free agency system as well, in that two things really. Teams with cap space need to wake up, I feel, now with this new free agency process, and recognize that restricted free agents are actually achievable of getting now. And we'll talk about a couple of them later on, I'm sure. One in particular that you know about. But, you can max restricted free agents now, and player agents have to make a decision on that. And it kind of holds the franchise, that's the home franchise, to accountable now a lot more than it will have done in the actual DDS application. But it creates this amazing opportunity window for teams that have restricted free agents who have that low cap hold to go and grab another talented star to pair with them, as the Houston Rockets did with James Harden. And I felt that with this one in particular, I don't know what you thought, but they were just ahead of the game with this one. They recognized that no one was going to max Karl Anthony Towns because they knew Houston were going to just match it and just pay him the maximum salary for 5 years because he is that good a player. But because they knew that, and other teams knew that, there was this great opportunity window for the Rockets to go and get a star, and they certainly did that.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see what teams with cap decide to do going forward. And I also think that Houston had a built-in advantage that teams going forward won't be able to, and that's that. I know Miles told the PAs to take it slowly the first few days while everybody gets adjusted to the system. Whereas, I think going forward, teams will go, okay, now we know how the system works. Now we're going to go after those RFAs right away. Even though they'll get matched, that will shorten a team like Houston's window to be able to go and pick up a star player. By going after him right away, you have a better chance of his signing the offer sheet quickly and or forcing the team to put in a max right away and have them sign quickly. So there won't be as long a window for the Houston situation going forward, which I think will be much better for the league.
Yeah, and I think what's going to be really interesting, and the decision that I really wanted a team just to do in this situation, I was calling out for someone just to please to maximum salary him, because that will force the player agent to make a decision. But perhaps not with Karl Anthony Towns, because he is that max salary guy. His personality matches really well to sort of staying with this host team for that kind of money. But what I'd be really interested to see next year is if a restricted free agent who's probably not worth maximum salary, but a team is under the cosh for cap reasons, or they don't necessarily want to pay him the money, but whether a team with cap room will come in and offer that 2+1 deal, because I think the Miami GM kind of pointed out a little bit, but and with some of these restricted free agents, it would be interesting to see, if you could force the hand of them and sort of say, okay, we'll give you a 2+1 with a player option, because when you come out of that 2+1, if you don't take that player option, you'll be eligible for more cap, essentially for more salary. Whether that will be enough to entice some of these restricted free agents who are not necessarily getting offers, and they're not maximum restricted free agents. They're not the top tier of that class. They're sort of your middle sort of 15 players. Whether that entices some slightly different thinking between the player agent. Just something I was looking forward to seeing someone try and do this off season. I didn't really see it, and I think it might be more of an option going forward, as well as just maximum restricting free agent. There's two options. You can max them right the way the full length, force them, the home team, to match with an offer, or you might be able to do this 2+1 and force the player out into an unrestricted free agent market earlier than possibly we would have seen in the past.
Yeah. I think that's definitely a strategy to consider going forward. and it will be interesting next year because next year is when you have really one of the deepest uh, restricted free agent classes we've had in the CSL.
Mm.
I think, with the exception of the inaugural draft, next year's free agency will be the second best restricted free agency we've had in league history. And there will be a number of teams with, RFA, max cap space. I think Dallas will probably have. I think Brett said
Yeah,
earlier.
they're angling for next
Somebody's
season.
going to have about 50 million.
The
Uh,
Clippers will
I
have 50
know.
million, I think, as
Yeah,
well.
I know New York didn't really spend all that much in free agency. Uh, they mostly concentrated on re-signing some guys to some low-cost deals. So they'll have cap. As I did the back of the napkin calculations, we should have an RFA max available. Um, Milwaukee hasn't spent a lot of money, and they had cap space available this free agency. So there's a bunch of teams who are going to have cap space, and we're going to have a very rich class of restricted free agents. So the strategy that we see going on next year is going to be really fascinating vis-a-vis RFAs, and maybe some teams will go for that 2+1 strategy that you discussed. It's an interesting tactic to consider,
Yeah, and I
definitely.
think next year will be interesting. As you said, it's a deep class, but it's also a really concentrated class on a few select teams. So it'd be
Yep.
interesting to see how that plays out because, whilst these teams can probably afford to max, the 4 or 5 players they've got that are restricted free agents, that's going to have a massive financial impact on them when it comes, 2, 3 years down the line, and then they've got another set of lottery players they've got to max salary. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating, certainly. Should we move on to another player that was an interesting discussion, I guess, for this year? I mean, there's no point us talking about a couple of these, but I'm going to sort of jump a little bit into the sort of Zach Levine territory, mainly because of the bidding war that happened with this, which I thought was quite interesting. So there was kind of two teams, I think, in the end. It was Dallas and Memphis who were going back and forth over salary for Zach Levine. In the end, the Memphis Grizzlies managed to retain him on quite a sizable deal, 4 years, heavy amount of raises, and a player option in there. Um, how did you see this one play out? Because this was quite a good one because you could see the bidding going on in the actual document spreadsheet, back and forth, the back and forth.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. I mean, initially when I saw the bidding war erupt over Levine, I thought, why? He's like the most overrated player in the league. He's not in every team that he's been on in DDS3, he has not generated wins. And he's been with some great general managers. He was with the Houston Rockets. He was with Andre. He was with some other people that I can't remember off the top of my head. So why? But then I started thinking about it. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. We're switching to 19,
yeah,
where
yeah,
offense is going to be much more viable. Um, you have the opportunity to hide him defensively, and conversely, as Dennis pointed out, the other team's top defender can go on him. So that's going to be an interesting chess match as well. Um, you know, because Memphis doesn't really have any other scorers outside of him. Um, is he going to be able to live up to that contract when he's drawing the opposing team's best individual defender night after night? Or is it going to be like it was in 3, where, yeah, he scores a bunch of points, but um, it's not. It's essentially stat padding. It doesn't add wins. So what I think Memphis will need to do, and and I think we'll see this play out across other teams as well. It's no longer going to be enough to have that one scorer. You're going to need at least two scorers, and that dovetails really well with. And I've mentioned this before, but I'll bring it up again. When I was in the sports business classroom at the NBA Summer League, and we were talking to Daryl Morey, the Houston Rockets general manager in real life. He said statistically what they found is that in order to win a championship, you need at least two all NBA players. Um, he said when they did their research and they went back over the last 25 years, he said there's only been one team that's ever won a championship with only one All NBA player, and I think that was one of his Hakeem Houston Rockets, ironically enough.
Hmm.
So yeah, and because the league is so obsessed with scoring as a primary metric for determining all NBA status, or in this case, all CSL status, I think we're going to see that shift happen in 19 as well with the individual player defensive assignments. You're going to need two all CSL players to really be able to compete for a championship, which is why I think Houston will be in great shape going forward with Cat and Monk. Even if Michael Porter ends up busting completely, which could happen, even if he does that, and Kemba fall, and the age regression smacks Kemba in the face, they still have those two all CSL guys in Monk and Kemba to build around, be the guys going forward. I think Memphis will take a step back in 19, and unless they can find that second scorer,
Yeah, I
at least a
mean,
scorer who
just
replicates
just to
that
jump
all
into him,
CSL.
I can't. I agree with what you're saying completely. I think Memphis were taking a step back anyway with some of their off-season moves. So we're going to see a natural regression, I think, from the Grizzlies anyway, from that sort of seventh, eighth seed, probably to a lottery team now. I think that's my
Right.
opinion. I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
exactly where they're going. I guess two things on this actual free agency signing or re-signing for them. Dallas, I felt, just saw this as just an opportunity, a value play essentially. If they can get Zach LaVine, the next GM who comes in can probably flip him for a pick or something, basically, going into new DDS, because someone
Yep.
will take a gamble in it. I look at him and he's one of the great test beds for DDS 19 when we get there, as you said. On Grizzlies' hand, they can't afford to lose him. He is their only scorer. If they lose him, that team goes from being that middling tier team probably being a bottom 8 team in this league. That's the difference I felt. We can argue he doesn't get wins, but it does make a huge difference when you've got a guy who can put up points fairly efficiently, which is what he does. So
Well, but that raises the question. Um, can you go to Memphis's page real quick?
yeah, sure.
I want to see their pick situation.
Yeah, 1 sec. Slightly different for this one. I'm going to have to drop this screen down and then put a new screen up. 1
Okay.
sec. Here we go. So I think they hold all of their picks at the moment going forward. I may be wrong.
Yeah.
I can't
So
remember whether they flipped one or
yeah.
not. But
So it might have been a better situation for them. And I think I think the Nets kind of fall into this too. I need to finish writing that article um, about the big RFA bomb, but they don't have that's one thing about Memphis. They've always had a collection of decent talent, but never any, franchise talent. The closest they had was Chris Middleton, who is always going to be limited because of his really crappy discipline. Um, oh, that's right. He's back on the
He's back
Grizzlies. All
there,
right.
so they do
I
have,
forgot. I forgot.
he will make a step change in new DDS because he'll take more 3-point shots. So he'll go from probably a 19 points per game player probably to a 26, 27 points per game player, I would imagine. Because he'll take
that's
between
a good point.
eight and 10 shots from the 3-point line. So
yeah,
they do have that going for them, but
Yeah.
they've made some other moves which, in my opinion, won't help them at all. Tyler Ulis, I'm looking at you, but I guess the Grizzlies are an interesting one. They had to keep him. They probably can flip him if they need to, but they need other things. That's what we're saying, I think, to get back into a playoff hunt other than just re-signing Zach LaVine, basically.
Yeah.
So should we move on to a couple of different players and talk about them? So I would talk about Rubio, but I feel that that's not a great discussion. I'm trying to pick some of the more interesting signings. So I guess the next one, probably looking at it, is probably Bryce Cotton. I think you can see. Let me just flip this back up. I'll change it back to the forum screen quickly, Tim, because you can just see the amount of comments that you had off of this signing. This was incredible. Let me just quickly change this back. So you can see that everyone else had between 9 and 15 comments. Bryce Cotton had 71 because it just caused a lot of debate between the team that were trying to re-sign him, the Utah Jazz, and the teams that were competing with him, which I think were the Washington Wizards, the Brooklyn Nets. I think the Clippers were in there at one point. They dropped away. Ended up being the Washington Wizards who end up signing Bryce Cotton, I think, to quite a sizable deal, which obviously sparked a huge debate between the Jazz GM and pretty much everyone else around this decision. But before I'll let you jump into him here and just sort of give your thoughts on the free agency signing, I guess let's just see if we can quickly dig out the player agent comment to just start us off on a discussion here. If I can actually find it, which I don't think I can. It must be on page 1.
Here
we go. So they added a bit of context.
The discussion was
around
the free agency system itself.
Yeah. So the reasoning here that the player agent gave was essentially it came down to money in the end. I think is the main reason. The Jazz and the Wizards are in similar sort of playoff territory. The Jazz had a bit of a down year this year, but similar. They've had similar sort of playoff performances in the past, but the sense I got here that it was essentially the Wizards just basically put money down to get him, and that ended up being the difference maker. What are your thoughts with this one?
Yeah, I thought it was I thought it was a brilliant move by Gary. Cotton is exactly the sort of player who will fit perfectly next to Milos Teodosic. I think the Wizards, if I remember correctly, still have some work to do on their front court. The last time I looked, I wasn't too impressed with it. But, it's by signing Cotton and having Milos, they are another team in the Southeast with a fantastic backcourt situation. Charlotte's got Dunn and Young, or Young and Dunn, however they decide to do those guys. You've got Miami, who can throw any sort of weird ass lineup possible because they have Ben Simmons and
they could play like 5 guys in the backcourt basically.
Yeah. So I thought it was a great signing by the Wizards. I think they're not to the level of Miami yet, but I think Bryce gets them much closer to it. On Utah's side, I can personally see Kevin's point where Cotton really didn't matter much to Utah. So, rather than paying him all that money, when he didn't have a huge impact for them. Um, it makes sense to say, okay, I'm not going to get into a bidding war over Cotton. Fine, he can just go. I don't care. He's, I've got Kyrie. So, Cotton's not going to be a big deal for us anyway.
Yeah, I think so, and yeah, completely agree. I think it kind of came down to in the end was this is how I saw the discussion in my head. If this was an actual free agency bidding war, essentially negotiation war, in that the Wizards basically turned around to Cotton and said, "You'll start for us. We'll give you, $40 million a year for 3 years. We want you to pair up with Milos in the backcourt." The Jazz went, "We want you to start for us. You pair up with Irving in the backcourt. Same as Milos, but we'll only pay you." I can't remember what he ended up putting in the end. I think it was around sort of the 10 million mark, possibly. The only decision maker for me, if it was Cotton, was okay. I can earn $4 million playing in a Eastern Conference, which is I'll probably stand more chance of making the playoffs and making a run than I would with the Jazz going forward at the moment. So tough decision, I think, again. But yeah, I mean, the Wizards essentially just put the checkbook down and went, "How much do you want?" essentially, and walked away with Cotton. And the Jazz weren't willing to compete with that. Is what I thought I saw from the discussion and the bidding that sort of happened through this process.
Yep, I agree.
So let's move on to some other guys. Let me just go back here. So I guess let's have a look at some of the other more interesting ones. So I won't talk about. I don't think there's anyone else on this page that really stands out to me as, "Oh, that was an interesting decision." I guess let's go back to the first page. So I guess the next one probably is is probably the one that I think we should probably end this video cast on. That is D'Angelo Russell. So before I talk about give a synopsis of what happened here, I want to get your take on it, really, Tim, in terms of your thought process into the bidding for Russell and where you wanted to go with this. What you thought Russell would add to the Lakers and kind of why you went with him over possibly other restricted free agents that were out on the market.
Yeah. Yeah, basically, it's a case of initially I had the max on just East Winslow. And then I pulled it off of him because I'm like, he's going to eat all the shots on my team and he's going to do it poorly. And that will just piss me off to no end. Uh, you know, Even if the pace, uh, probably the Pacers would have matched, but oh well. I pulled the offer, and then I started looking, and I'm like, oh, D'Angelo Russell is in free agency. And then I started thinking, he's been a player who's always intrigued me. Um, he can shoot out to 3-point range. We desperately need a point guard. He's only 23 years old. Screw it, I'm going to go after him. And I will admit to making a slight tactical error here, because I did not realize until I went back and looked over the free agency list that Jamal Murray's handling was as good as it was. Passing and handling, I didn't realize they were as good as they were. So if I had seen those, I would have maxed Murray instead. Um, but D'Angelo Russell is not a bad consolation prize. Yeah, he's overpaid. Yeah, he bears some interesting similarities to Moutier with that consistency issue. But, um, he definitely feels the need. We have 24.2 million coming off the books next year. So even with the increases in salary from the guys currently on my roster, even with what's right now projected as two lottery picks and my own second round pick, which should be 31. I think we will be the worst team in the league. Even with the draft pick holds, we will still have at least RFA max money maybe a little bit more. Um, so this is something that we could afford to do. I still think he will have interest for teams around the league, and eventually he'll shift into that sixth man point guard, shoot guard, shooting guard, bench scoring role. Um, and I think he'll be fantastic in 19. So this was really a case of I was able to pick up a young player who fills a role, fills a need, um, and the only thing I gave up was cap space, which not a big deal since I have 24.2 million coming off this summer, and then next summer. I mean, and then the summer after that, uh, Kiefer Sykes finally goes by. So, you know, it was essentially a free upgrade for me.
Yeah, I guess a free upgrade. The sacrifice you said is cap room possibly for next season. So how did you weigh up the decision between possibly getting D'Angelo Russell this year, who is not the best restricted free agent out there, and we openly can admit that, versus going into next season, throwing another max deal at a restricted free agent who might be slightly better than Russell, but I'd probably say slightly less chance of getting him. I mean, how did you weigh up that kind of risk reward factor?
Well, with some of the better restricted free agents, um, I the teams weren't in a financial or competitive situation where um, they would do anything other than match. And that's originally what I was going for with Winslow, and what I would have gone with Murray if I'd have checked his ratings beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, there's some price driving element, but you know, I will be able to offer another RFA max next summer. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah. So you still
you
have
know,
that option, I guess.
yeah. So with the finances, I was able to do this. Because I'll be able to do it again next year if I want to. Um, and very few contracts in this league are untradeable. Um, Even Moutier, who has a split opinion, there are some GMs like me who really do like him, besides Indiana, who traded for him.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was able to move that contract. I'll, if, I could flip Russell for another asset, down the line. So, at when you're in a financial situation like I am, um, you know, taking these polarizing players. Um, yeah, there's some teams who will have no interest in him and, will think, no, he's not with it. I'm just not going to invest in him. Well, all it takes is one other team to go, hey, I have a need. Especially since there's there's still a paucity of good available point guards in this league, and a lot of the quality point guards, they're all stashed on you know a handful of teams. So it's a chance to have a point guard asset that I can either keep throughout his contract or possibly flip him down the line.
Yeah,
And
I guess.
this did not impact anything that I would be able to do, uh, other than an in-season cap trade maybe, but with 24.2 million expiring contracts, the expiring contracts essentially are de facto cap space that I can use for trades in season. So, you know, really, this was one of those unique situations where um, there were no real downsides for me to do this.
No,
Um,
and I guess the $13 million salary in the grand scheme of things is not a huge amount to try and move it if you need to. It's not like it's a 22 million player, and you've got to put two
Exactly.
contracts together. 13 million is quite easy to find with the 125% rule. So makes
Yeah.
sense. He's obviously got a good age as well. So he's not 30. He's, you know, that length of his contract, he'll be performing at a good level through the full 4 years, basically. If you do keep him, but you know, if you do move him, it's an easy piece to move, I think.
Yeah. And you know, when he hits unrestricted free agency again, because it's a 4 year deal, you know, he'll be 27.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, he'll still be a year before, you know, kind of the official prime that that we kind of always have in mind, like
Mm.
28 to 31. Um,
So were you
so, you
surprised
know,
that?
he'll be a valuable asset, you know, you know, even in the last year of his deal, you know, hey, it's a chance to get a player who will still be in 20 or 20, wait, 23, 24, 25, 26. Yeah, 27
Yeah, so it'd be
when he hits his
27,
next
I
year.
guess. So Tim, were you surprised that that
Sorry, you're
he
cutting
wasn't
out.
matched in this situation? I was
Sorry.
gonna say, were you surprised that are you
Yeah,
surprised that he was not matched?
yeah, you're cutting out. Try moving and
Yes.
see if I can,
Okay.
because
So I
it's
was
staticky at
just
the
gonna
moment.
finish up with, were you surprised that they didn't match him in the end?
Yeah. It, like so many people said in the comments, this age 50-50 just Brooklyn. However, as you know, because I'm planning an article on this, you know,
Hmm.
deciding the ramifications, etc. Like other people have said, not matching really was the right decision for Brooklyn. That would have, where they are in this sort of mid-tier, late seed with limited upside because it all and going from his minuscule improvements his rookie training camp to, you know, now he has to try and match up with he got. So by declining, the
Hmm.
Nets are able to put themselves in a position where, okay, we haven't trapped ourselves in mid-tier status. We've still got a ton of cap space next summer to try and get a guy before other market at once. And we can also now look at the opportunity of let's trade off all our pieces, tear it down from Studs and Aiton, and you know, basically tank out for the next year, build up through high draft picks, and you know,
Yeah,
do
yeah.
a
I
proper
think,
rebuild. Whereas matching, they wouldn't be able to do that.
yeah, there's some real good upside, I guess, for Brooklyn, and I'm sure you'll describe it fully in the article that's coming up. And let's kind of stop there, and I don't want to kind of ruin that article and ruin the insight that you'll share with that in terms of the pros and cons for both teams, really. I guess it was an interesting decision because that's probably the first time we've seen a player of someone like D'Angelo Russell in terms of quality, where a team just walks away from him in restricted free agency, essentially. First time we've seen that probably for a little while, and it was interesting to kind of see that develop and play out. But I think we'll kind of leave it there for today. There's obviously a lot of other free agents that have been signed, and we've just sort of touched the tip of
Well,
the iceberg.
yeah, I do think there's one other big story hanging out there, and that's Oklahoma City
Mhm.
shooting itself in the foot with the Bledsoe and McRae signings.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that one is probably best left until the actual, probably when we do our season preview, because I think that ties in quite nicely with the mindset of Oklahoma City and where they're going with the short term rather than the long term focus. But yeah, absolutely,
Yeah,
they made some interesting decisions in free agency with retaining McRae and Bledsoe against limited competition. But I think we'll touch base on that one when we get to the actual conference previews and which teams are going to be vying for a championship this year. But it's been great to have you on, Tim, and best luck with the rest of free agency and the off season, and we'll catch up probably before then to talk about the season previews that are happening in Western Eastern Conference and
I'm back.
What's going to be happening. So it's great to have you on, and I'm sure we'll be back before the actual main season.
Yep. All right. Sounds good. We'll hit up again, recapping the offseason. Bye.